"You're holding up the line, old man. Either you have the correct forms and the exact fee, or you need to step aside. We haven't got all day." The voice, sharp as shattered glass, cut through the dull murmur of the Department of Motor Vehicles. It belonged to Janice Pettigrew, a woman whose name tag seemed to gleam with belligerent authority from behind the scratched plexiglass of Counter 3. Her eyes, magnified by thick lenses, were fixed on the elderly man standing before her, a man who seemed to shrink a little further into his worn, threadbare coat with every syllable she uttered. His name was Samuel Peterson, though no one in this echoing chamber of fluorescent lights and impatience knew it or would have cared if they did. He clutched a small, frayed envelope in one hand, his knuckles white. His shoulders were stooped, not just by age, but by a weariness that seemed to emanate from his very bones. He looked like 1,000 other forgotten men, adrift in a world that had long since moved on without them. The air around him was thick with the frustration of the people behind him, their collective sighs a palpable pressure. He was, in this moment and inconvenience, a snag in the relentless impersonal machinery of bureaucracy. If you believe every individual, especially those who have given much, deserves to be met with basic human decency, comment "respect" below. Samuel Peterson wasn't asking for much, just a renewal of his state identification card. His driver's license had expired years ago, shortly after his old truck had finally given up the ghost, and he hadn't the means or the need to replace it. But the ID card? That was essential. For doctor's appointments at the VA hospital, for cashing his meager pension check, for simply existing in a world that demanded constant proof of who you were. He'd been coming to the DMV for 3 weeks straight, each time presented with a new, seemingly insurmountable hurdle. Today, it was a missing utility bill from within. The last 30 days as proof of address, despite him having lived in the same small rented room for over a decade. The landlord, old Mrs. Henderson, bless her soul, paid the utilities herself and simply added it to his rent. He tried to explain this, his voice soft, almost a whisper, easily lost in the clatter of keyboards and the impatient shuffling of feet. I have my lease agreement," he offered, his gaze pleading, "and a letter from my landlord. She's very old. She doesn't—" Janice cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand, her perfectly manicured nails tapping an impatient rhythm on the countertop. "Sir, rules are rules. We need a utility bill in your name, dated within the last 30 days. No exceptions." Her gaze flicked past him to the next person in line, a young man with headphones around his neck, already rolling his eyes. Sam stood his ground, a flicker of something, desperation, perhaps, or a deep-buried stubbornness in his faded blue eyes. His thinning gray hair was neatly combed, though a few stray wisps escaped the confines of the faded baseball cap he always wore. It was a cap with no discernible logo, just a plain dark blue, softened and shaped by years of wear. He wasn't a disruptive man. He never raised his voice. He just waited, patiently, hoping for a sliver of understanding in a system that seemed designed to offer none. The tension in the queue behind Samuel ratcheted up. A woman with a crying baby sighed loudly. The young man directly behind Sam, reeking faintly of expensive cologne and impatience, muttered, "Come on, Grandpa. Some of us have actual jobs to get to." His voice was just loud enough for Sam to hear, a casual cruelty that stung more than Janice's official indifference. Sam's shoulders sagged a fraction more. He felt a familiar flush creep up his neck, the kind that spoke of embarrassment and a quiet simmering anger he hadn't allowed himself to truly feel in decades. He turned slightly, his eyes meeting the young man's for a brief moment. And there was no malice in Sam's gaze, only a profound sadness. The young man looked away, a flicker of something unreadable in his own eyes before the boredom returned. Janice, seeing Sam hadn't moved, called out, "Mr. Henderson, could you come? To counter 3, please?" Mr. Henderson, the branch supervisor, emerged from a back office. He was a portly man in a slightly too tight shirt, his expression one of perpetual, weary authority. He listened to Janice's clipped explanation, then turned to Sam, his smile thin and forced. "Sir," he began, his voice smoother than Janice's, but no less unyielding. "Miss Pettigrew is correct. Department policy is quite clear on the documentation required for proof of residency. Without a recent utility bill in your name, or one of the other accepted documents on this list," he tapped a laminated sheet on the counter, "we simply cannot process your renewal." Sam looked at the list. It was a litany of official papers he didn't possess or couldn't easily obtain. "But my situation is a little different," Sam tried again, his voice raspy. "My landlord, she's 92, she handles all that. I have my pension statements, my VA medical card." He gestured vaguely toward the envelope. Henderson shook his head slowly, a pantomime of regret. "I understand it can be frustrating, sir, but we must adhere to the regulations. They are in place for everyone's security." He sounded like a recording. "Perhaps you could ask your landlord to print an online statement for you?" Sam knew Mrs. Henderson didn't own a computer. Probably wouldn't know an online statement from a grocery receipt. The system was a fortress, and he was outside its walls, unarmed. A deep sigh escaped Sam's lips, a sound of utter defeat. He fumbled in his worn wallet, his fingers stiff with age and a touch of arthritis. He wasn't looking for money. He pulled out a very small, impossibly old photograph, creased at the edges and softened with time. It was a black and white image of 4 young men in crisp, though dusty, army uniforms. Grinning at the camera from somewhere hot and foreign, he pointed a trembling finger at one of the smiling faces, a young man with bright, confident eyes. "That was me," he said softly, his voice cracking slightly. "A long time ago." He then produced a single tarnished dog tag, laying it gently on the counter next to the photo. "Samuel David Peterson, aerial number RA1 19th, 8 feet 10 feet marks 530. The metal gleamed dully under the harsh fluorescent lights. Janice Pettigrew glanced at the items with a cursory, dismissive air. "Sir, while I appreciate your memorabilia, it does not change the requirements for a state-issued identification card." Her tone implied he was trying to use sentimentality to bypass regulations, a tactic she'd likely encountered and squashed many times. The tag lay there, a small metallic testament to a life of service, utterly ignored. The young man behind Sam snorted audibly. Mr. Henderson simply looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps you could come back when you have the correct paperwork, Mr. Peterson," he suggested, his voice still attempting a veneer of professional sympathy. Desperation gnawed at Sam. He needed that ID. He thought for a moment, then reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out an ancient non-smart cell phone. He scrolled through his few contacts with a clumsy thumb, then pressed the call button. He turned away from the counter, speaking in a low murmur. "Billy? It's Sam." "Sam. Peterson. Yeah, I'm all right. Listen, I'm down at the downtown DMV, the one near the old base. I'm having a bit of a bureaucratic tangle, you could say." "Yes?" "Sergeant Major Samuel Peterson, RA1 9876 530. Could you possibly see if anyone can just verify who I am for these folks? It would be a great help." He listened for a moment, a flicker of hope briefly illuminating his tired features. "Thank you, Billy. I appreciate it." He ended the call and stood quietly to the side of the counter, away from the impatient line, his shoulders bowed. The dog tag still lay forgotten on Janice Pettigrew's Formica battlefield. 5 minutes crawled by. Then 10. The DMV carried on, its chaotic symphony of stamping, typing, and exasperated sighs. Janice Pettigrew served several more people, her efficiency sharp and impersonal. Mr. Henderson retreated to his office. Sam leaned against a wall, the faded blue of his cap pulled low, his eyes closed. He looked like he might fall asleep standing, up or perhaps simply fade into the drab institutional paint. Then, a low rumble began to permeate the air. At first, it was almost imperceptible, a distant vibration, but it grew steadily, insistently, until the windows of the DMV began to rattle softly. Heads started to turn, conversations faltered. The rumble became a powerful, throbbing roar, the unmistakable sound of heavy-duty engines. Suddenly, two massive, olive-drab military transport trucks, their grills like iron jaws, pulled up directly in front of the DMV, their air brakes hissing like angry dragons. They effectively blocked the street. Behind them, a sleek black government SUV with dark-tinted windows and official United States Army plates glided to a halt. The doors of the DMV burst open, and three figures strode in, their movements crisp and purposeful. Leading them was a man who radiated an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. He was tall, ramrod straight, his uniform immaculate, adorned with the silver eagles of a full-bird colonel. His face was stern, etched with lines of command, his eyes sharp and scanning the room like a hawk. Flanking him were a major and a captain, both equally imposing, their expressions serious and alert. The noisy DMV fell into an abrupt, stunned silence. Even the crying baby seemed to hold its breath. Colonel Marcus Thorne's piercing gaze swept across the bewildered faces of the DMV patrons and staff. He ignored the gaping mouths, the frozen postures. His eyes found Samuel Peterson, still, leaning against the far wall, looking small and insignificant. Instantly, the colonel's stern demeanor transformed. The harsh lines around his mouth softened, replaced by an expression of profound respect, concern, and something akin to affection. He strode directly toward Sam, his polished boots echoing. On the linoleum floor, a sound that seemed to fill the sudden cavernous silence. The major and captain followed a pace behind. As Colonel Thorne reached Sam, he stopped, drew himself up to his full, impressive height, and executed a salute so sharp, so precise, it could have cut glass. "Sergeant Major Peterson, sir." His voice, clear and resonant, boomed through the astonished room. "Colonel Marcus Thorne, reporting. My sincere apologies for the delay in our arrival. We came as soon as we received word." Samuel Peterson startled, straightened up, a look of bewilderment on his face. He almost returned the salute out of reflex, but caught himself, a faint blush rising on his cheeks. The entire DMV was frozen in a tableau of disbelief. Janice Pettigrew's face had drained of all color, her mouth hanging slightly ajar. Mr. Henderson, who had re-emerged from his office at the commotion, looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. The arrogant young man who had sneered at Sam moments before seemed to be trying to melt into the floor. The forgotten dog tag still lay on counter 3, now seeming to pulse with a hidden significance. Colonel Thorne dropped his salute but remained, standing at attention before the older man. He turned his head slightly toward his aide. "Major Davies," he commanded, his voice like steel, "please ensure Sergeant Major Peterson receives his renewed identification card immediately. All necessary documentation and expedited authorizations from the Department of Defense and the veterans. Administration are in this attaché. See to it personally." The major, a man with a chest full of ribbons himself, nodded crisply. "Yes, sir." He approached the petrified Janice Pettigrew at counter 3, placing a substantial, official-looking leather attaché case on the counter with a decisive thud. "We have everything required," he stated, his voice firm and brooking no argument. "Let's get this done. Now." Colonel Thorne then turned his formidable attention to Mr. Henderson and Miss Pettigrew, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. His voice, though quiet, was laced with an arctic chill that sent shivers down the spine of everyone within earshot. "I understand," he began, his eyes like chips of ice, "that Sergeant Major Peterson encountered some difficulties in obtaining a simple state identification card today." Mr. Henderson swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Colonel, sir," he stammered, his earlier bureaucratic smoothness completely gone, "we were merely, following procedure. Standard regulations, you understand?" Bush procedure, Colonel Thorne repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Then it rose, gaining power and volume with each word. Regulations. Do you have any earthly idea who this man is? He gestured toward Samuel Peterson, who looked profoundly uncomfortable with the unfolding drama. This is Sergeant Major Samuel David Peterson, United States Army retired, 35 years of active service to this nation, recipient of the Silver Star for Valor, not once but twice, 3 Purple Hearts, meaning he shed his blood for this country on 3 separate occasions. He led men through unimaginable hell in 3 different conflicts, from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the deserts of the Middle East. Thorne paused, his eyes briefly distant, as if seeing scenes no one else in that room could comprehend. This man, he continued, his voice now thick with emotion and an unwavering respect, was my platoon sergeant during Operation Desert Storm. He taught me everything I know about leadership, about courage, about sacrifice. He saved my life, sir, and the lives of at least a dozen other young soldiers under his command during an ambush outside Basra. He dragged me, wounded and unconscious, through half a mile of enemy fire to safety. He is not just a veteran, Mr. Henderson. He is a legend, a hero. The colonel's gaze swept over the stunned faces in the DMV. And this hero, this legend, cannot get a simple piece of plastic identifying him as a citizen of the country he nearly died for multiple times because of procedure. Janice Pettigrew looked like she was about to faint. Her face was ashen, her hands trembling. The arrogant young man who had taunted Sam earlier was now beet red, staring at his shoes in abject shame. Sam, ever humble, ever reluctant to be the center of attention despite the vindication washing over him, placed a gentle, trembling hand on Colonel Thorne's uniformed arm. "Marcus." "Son, it's all right," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "They were just doing their jobs, I suppose." Colonel Thorne looked down at the older man, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes softening into a deep, abiding affection. "No, Sam," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "It's not all right. It's long past time people remembered what true service and sacrifice look like. It's time they showed the respect that's been earned, not demanded." He gave Sam's shoulder a reassuring squeeze, then turned back to the thoroughly chastened DMV staff. His voice was quieter now, but no less impactful. "This man, Sergeant Major Peterson, has never asked for special treatment in his life. He wouldn't even tell you who he was or what he'd done unless pushed to the absolute limit. All he, and men and women like him, ask for is dignity, understanding, and yes, a little bit of respect. The respect they have earned 1,000 times over in ways most of us can only imagine." While the colonel spoke, Major Davies had efficiently presented the necessary documents to a now trembling Janice, with Henderson hovering anxiously. She processed Sam's ID renewal in record time, her hands fumbling with the keyboard, her usual brusque efficiency replaced by a flustered haste. The machine whirred and spat out a new, crisp identification card. Major Davies took it, examined it, then handed it to Sam with a small, respectful bow of his head. "Sergeant Major Peterson, sir, your ID." Sam took it, a faint smile finally touching his lips. "Thank you, Major. Thank you, Marcus." The atmosphere in the DMV was thick with a mixture of stunned silence, profound shame, and a dawning palpable respect. The young man who had made the snide grandpa comment slowly approached Samuel Peterson, his head bowed, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "Sir, Sergeant Major Peterson," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I am so incredibly sorry. I was rude and ignorant and just plain wrong. I had no idea. Please, sir, can you forgive my disrespect?" Sam looked at the young man, his blue eyes holding a surprising warmth and a gentle wisdom. He offered a small, forgiving nod. "Son," he said quietly, "we all make mistakes. Learn from this one. Treat everyone you meet with a little more kindness. You never know their story." The young man nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I will, sir. I promise. Mr. Henderson, the supervisor, stepped forward, his face a mask of contrition. He extended his hand to Sam. Sergeant Major Peterson, on behalf of the entire staff of this branch, and personally, I offer our deepest, most sincere apologies. There is simply no excuse for the way you were treated today. Your dignity was compromised, and for that, I am truly sorry. We will be implementing immediate retraining for all our staff on customer sensitivity, with a particular focus on how to properly assist and honor our veterans. This will not happen again under my watch. You have my word. Janice Pettigrew stood beside him, tears now openly streaming down her face. She couldn't meet Sam's eyes, but mumbled, "I'm so sorry, sir. So very sorry." Sam simply nodded, again accepting their apologies without rancor. He was not a man to hold a grudge. Colonel Thorne placed a supportive hand on Sam's back. "Shall we, Sergeant Major?" he asked gently. Sam nodded. As they walked toward the exit, escorted by the colonel and his aides, the entire DMV, patrons and staff alike, stood in silent awe and respect. Some even offered tentative salutes or placed hands over their hearts. At the door, Colonel Thorne paused and turned back to address the room one last time, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "Let today be a lesson for everyone here. You never ever know the battles someone has fought, the sacrifices they have made, or the burdens they carry. Treat every single person you encounter with dignity and respect, especially those who have worn the uniform of this nation and pledged their lives for your freedom." With that, they were gone, leaving behind a room full of humbled individuals and the indelible memory of the quiet old man who was a giant among them. And so Samuel Peterson, his dignity not just restored, but elevated, finally had his new identification card. More than that, he had inadvertently sparked a small but significant change within the cold, impersonal walls of that downtown DMV. The staff, particularly Mr. Henderson and Miss Pettigrew, were profoundly shaken and humbled by the encounter. True to his word, Mr. Henderson implemented sweeping changes to their customer service protocols, instituting mandatory sensitivity training with a special emphasis on assisting veterans with the honor they deserved. The lesson of that day was not easily forgotten. This encounter served as a stark, dramatic reminder to everyone present, and to all who would later hear the story, that true heroes often walk among us, unassuming and unheralded. They don't wear their valor on their sleeves or demand accolades. They are the quiet pillars of courage and sacrifice upon whose shoulders our freedoms rest. It reinforced the timeless truth that one should never, ever judge a book by its cover. For beneath a worn exterior can lie a story of incredible strength and profound service. Weeks later, a discreet but meaningful plaque appeared near the entrance of that DMV branch. It read, "This office is dedicated to serving all citizens with efficiency, courtesy, and respect, especially our nation's veterans, who have given so much." Janice Pettigrew, changed by the encounter, was seen volunteering at a local VA outreach program on her weekends, her manner now gentle and compassionate. And Samuel Peterson? He continued his quiet life, but now, when he visited the VA for his appointments, or helped another elderly friend navigate some bureaucratic maze, there was a new spring in his step. His new ID card, tucked securely in his worn wallet, was more than just plastic. It was a small symbol of recognition. A reminder that even in the twilight of his years, his service, his very being, mattered. True heroes deserve our unwavering support and deepest gratitude. If you agree, and if Sergeant Major Peterson's story of quiet dignity and ultimate vindication touched your heart, subscribe to Hidden Sparks for more inspirational stories. Please type honor in the comments to show your respect for all those who have served.